Chapter 11 is called Leaders, Artists, Innovators, the Psychologies of History and Imagination. And, such a fun chapter, talking about what actually leads to these dramatic changes on, again, multiple levels. So first we start off by saying, a dramatic change can be created by an epistemic gap. So this idea that there's unmet collective needs and goals, that there's ignorance. And so you can actually increase the likelihood of really disruptive change through processes of censorship and willful blindness, because turning away from the needs of the group, the needs of the moment, like environmental threats, creates these latent forces that build up and then cause society to have to lurch as opposed to adapting incrementally. Then we talk about the idea of a compelling narrative or frame, and lots of different theories from different fields have tried to raise this question. And we say that, frames, compelling frames, compelling narratives have to diagnose problems, propose solutions, and provide a call to arms. So that's from the framing literature. And in the narrative space, we know that the narratives have to be moralized and aligned to group norms, and they have to seem achievable from the present, and they have to be expressed clearly, and they have to involve humans with agency. So those were the elements that we pick out in the chapter. And then we talk about the idea that some groups and some social networks and some systems are more ready to have radical visions than others. So groups have more radical visions when they're mutually trusting and densely interconnected, because when the groups are interconnected, they can form a narrative that actually is responsive to each other and that has a lot, the engine of norms, as we talked about from chapter 1. And then systems are more able to be transformed when there's an element of sort of lumpiness in the system, because when the system has autonomous groups, those can be crucibles of innovation, and the genius idea that is the source of a vision is more likely to emerge in that context on the periphery or the margin of a kind of narrative where people are more attuned to the gaps. And we talk about the idea of unconventional actors that can kind of be brokers of that vision and transformation. And, an important part in this chapter is us reflecting on how, narratives of transformation in human society don't have to actually connect with the environment. So there's this kind of peril that can build up of nature blindness, and people can create compelling narratives that are dissociated from reality and fail to create narratives that are addressing urgent environmental threats. So we riff quite a bit about, social ecosystem change in the book generally, and think about in the chapter the idea of social change via collapse, via disruption, via disaster, and how that can be facilitated by, intergroup processes and normative influence and identity dynamics that are taking us away from looking at an environment. And then we talk about how groups might have properties and individuals, groups, and systems might have properties of being less vulnerable to social change via collapse, system change via collapse, if they have a future orientation, if they have a focus on integrity, which in our chapter we're talking about integrity, not just in the sense of being internally consistent, but also aligned to an environmental reality, an outside reality outside the group. And then also that would be associated by internal trust. So those kind of distinct aspects. I guess that's some of the themes that I see in this chapter. It's a rich, meaty chapter. What about you, Kiara? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really enjoy this chapter, kind of the exploration of what allows, in some cases, specific individuals to kind of find their pocket in time and space to have a massive impact, and to think about how if that context was different, then their story would probably be very different. But it really does illustrate the power of that context, but also the narrative that they're able to spin for the context. And like you said, sometimes it's in touch with reality, and in other times it seems incredibly divorced from reality. And in some ways, I think, not in the long term, but in the short term, those ones can be very powerful if they tap into something that people want to believe, perhaps if the reality is a bit scary or just hard to comprehend. If the story is simple, a simple, powerful story, and I think that's a really great thing that's kind of explored. And just kind of how all of that ties in together with how groups and networks connect as well. So, there's that, if you've got connections with someone, you're more likely to trust people you have things in common with, even if you don't know them specifically. And that kind of reflects what you see in those networks. We have those intergroup commonalities, and I think that it's really interesting. I love social networks and group networks. I think it's a really cool space to explore.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with what you're saying about the importance as well of trying to talk about groups and networks, which we do throughout the book, but in this chapter, we really dive into that. Cecilia, what are your thoughts?
I think we talk about the importance of vision to represent the imagination in this chapter, and these visions begin when what I have called as collective purposes unmet, and then it will create space for new ideas and to help people to reimagine their problems and to reimagine the solutions that potentially solve these problems, especially and also not just about the solutions, but also how they should achieve the solutions through collective work. And I think this chapter is also related to the two engines they mentioned in chapter 1, like the engine of norm and the engine of leaders, especially about the engine of leaders, because it's very important for leaders to capture the visions that a community or a group shared with each other, and then how they not just articulate this vision, but also how they spread those visions by building trust, by building connection, and how to how to transform those visions into clear storytelling that inspire people to act to achieve what previously they perceived as the collective purposes were unmet, for example.
Yeah. I really like that. And I like how you said that, because it's like in the chapter 1, we're like, look, there's the engine of truth, but truth isn't enough. You've got to have the engine of norms, but norms isn't enough. You've got to have leaders and followers that are co-creating this norm. And I guess in the chapter, in a way, we return to that point and also highlight that it is possible for norms and leaders to kind of veer off, leaving truth behind them. But in the chapter, we say if you do that too much, right, you create this latent force, this epistemic gap, which leads to disruptive change and disaster. So it's really a nice full circle there. Thank you.